Let's dive into templates and how that works. So we'll continue building our events module. But just a little bit about templates first. So first thing is structure. So structures are or templates. When you're working about templates, Sitecore templates, they are always created as part of a module, just like we've talked about everything else. And there's a layer folder under templates. I think we've been through this. Now what's interesting, just like we had different types of items that we had to control them differently, we also now, in order to adhere to this kind of architecture, we have to sort of separate out the different template types. So we don't have just one type of template. And we've broken it down into 6 different types of templates that you're working with. I'm going to go through them, pretty much all of them, but this is for the term of the concept of conventions. Where do you put the different template types? In what type of modules do you maintain them? And how do you wire them all together? How do you maintain them on disk? What items do you serialize? What items are definition items versus content items? So the 3 important ones, the 3 ones that you're most concerned with sort of business logic and structuring your website are the page type template, the data source template, and the interface template. So page templates define the pages and the information architecture. So those are the ones that have the layout and create your structure on your website. So the context items. When you visit a page, that item will be based on a page type. These kind of templates are only defined in the project layer because these are the ones that bind everything together. And if we bind everything together, we have loads of dependencies. And the only place we have loads of dependencies is in the project layer. They can have a layout defined. So given that it's a page template, it has a layout defined. So it has a layout on it. Again, that's where it wires everything together. It never defines fields. So a page type never has any fields because it doesn't have any business logic. Who would use those fields? So a page type is just the wiring together of the layout with the business logic, the renderings, and those kind of things. So in other words, page type templates are also never referenced from business logic. No business logic has any concept of the page types. We'll come back to how this is all sort of how it hangs together, because it might seem a little abstract if you haven't dived into everything. So data source templates are very similar to page type templates. Data source templates act as data sources to renderings. So you can say, well, a page can also act as a data source. So yes, a page type template and a data source template are very similar. Again, only project layer modules define these. As opposed to a page template, a data source template never has a layout defined. So that's the distinction. And again, it never defines fields. It's never referenced from business logic. So items that derive from or that are created from page type template or from a data template is often interchangeable. Think of the events, for example. The customer could have a decision to create an event page, which means we would create a page template on events. They could also choose to just have an event repository where there's someone managing all the events and they have a list of all the events. In one case, you would have a data source template, which doesn't have a layout, and the other would have a page template, which has a layout. Because in the one where you only show the list, you don't need a layout. So it's kind of interchangeable as those 2 templates. It's one of the cool things about the architecture, I think, but I'll get back to that as well. The last thing is the interface templates, and this is the interesting ones. These are the templates that define an interface for the logic. So these are the ones that your business logic works against. So these are the ones that your code works against. That's why they only exist in the feature and foundation modules. It never has layouts, ever. And it can have fields. It doesn't have to have fields. Your business logic can actually work against an item and query whether that item is derived from a given template. It doesn't matter if it has fields. So it goes up the tree. Is this the root of the website? Yes, it is. Fine. So that's an interface. The business logic will know that the item derives from an interface. It doesn't have any fields. Oh. So all the interface templates are prefixed with underscores just to differentiate them from the others, convention. And again, interface templates, this is the reason why your business logic has no concept of page types and data source templates. They use the interface templates to recognize items of given types. So I'll get back to that. So let's just quickly look at an item. So this is the January marketing webinar event for the site that we're looking at. It derives from, or it's created, it's based on the event page template. That event page template is in the project module. So that's created in the project module and sort of wires that up. It derives from it, it's based on the underscore event interface template. Now that interface template has the fields, so the event title, the event description, the event date, all those kind of things. Now, because the customer wanted this to be a page, she probably wanted it to show up in a menu, which means that we would also derive this page from the underscore navigable. The underscore navigable has the checkbox that says, is this page shown in a menu? It has the title that's called menu title, things like that. It's also an interface that the business logic uses just to recognize whether an item should be shown in the menu. So it just queries whether that item is based on that template. Since the customer also wanted this page to be part of the search index, searchable, it's derived from the underscore indexable. So that's where the Lucene logic triggers in. If it doesn't derive from it, we don't really care about it. So our search functionality would only query the ones that derive from underscore indexable. Does this make sense? So, how do we then reference the business logic, the templates from our business logic? So, references to templates and fields in Sitecore is probably number one cause of rogue dependencies. So, business logic in one feature module just randomly referencing some field in another module. It happens all the time, and it's one of those things to be very careful about. So this is why in Habitat, as a convention, we've set up the templates constants. So there's always, every module has a templates.cs, which has constants for all templates and all fields. In that way, if one feature module should want to refer to another feature module's fields, it would have to make a hard reference to that assembly and then reference that assembly's template CS. And it would hopefully make that developer think twice about doing it. Again, I mentioned before, consider using an object relation mapper like GlassMapper or something like that in your development tool set. Some people like it, some people don't. Also, always reference templates and fields by ID and never by name. It's just a very good practice because you might want to change that name. Again, your componentization is never flawless. Why should your template structure be flawless? So it also opens up for another really good thing is name your templates and renderings and things like that in Sitecore towards the users, not towards yourself as a developer. Try to avoid those crazy abbreviations or camel casing or things like that, because it just looks strange to an average user. Why is there no spaces in my names? I mean, you see that all the time in Sitecore. So you open the add rendering, and everything is just no spaces in anything. So I've been in there. I've talked about this before. Don't ever do that title thing. Reference a field as a title. So it's a very classic pattern that we see in Sitecore, where the search functionality will just pick up the title field from any template. So you'll have multiple title fields all around different templates. It's a bad practice. It's that kind of duck typing where if it quacks like a duck, it is a duck. Because title is not a title, and you need to strongly type things a bit more. So. And the last thing is, think of templates as classes. Use the is operator. You would never reference a class in C# as, is this object equal this class? You always use the is operator. And this is the same way. You should, when you're referencing templates in business logic, you should always use the is operator. And you say, is there an is operator? No, there's not. Which is why this is probably the most important method in all of Habitat. The extension, Sitecore extension method called isDerived. So you go item.isDerived. So that's probably the most used method in all of Habitat. And it's really important to do this, because that takes care of all these references all over the place, where you suddenly reference in a feature module, you reference a page type, because that's what the item derives from, right? It is that page type. So now there's a challenge here, because that's not supported everywhere. So we have if you look at the Sitecore search API, for example. So if you want to get a list of items from the search API, how do you do that? How do you do a query against the Lucene index and say use the is operator? So in Habitat, there's an extension that puts all the base templates of an item in the search index, so you can actually search that. So you search against. So instead of the template field, you use the base templates fields, and then you query for the ID in that. The one challenge we have is the old school query, so the Sitecore query syntax, that has no equivalent. So there's no way of doing that. Challenge. So try to avoid using Sitecore queries. Use the Lucene index, which is also a good practice, or API calls. The other types of templates, so we have a folder content structure. So one recommended practice here would be not to use the common /folder template. It's one of the templates that ships out of the box, and it even has its own folder under /templates. So it's like promoted as something you want to use. Don't use it, because it narrows it limits you in the structure. So if you start using that common folder up there, then you have to explicitly set insert options and all those kind of things on that folder you just created. The alternative is, of course, to create your own folder templates. So every time there's a folder, every time you need a structure, let's say you have that event repository. So you have the events folder, and then in there you put your events, but you need a hierarchy. You need multiple sort of folders under there. Then those folders should be created in the events module and be part of that kind of structure. So you can set not the events module, in the project layer module, so that you can create the structure for that events repository from a folder that specifically is an event folder. because then you can just go in there, set insert options on that specific folder, and it'll roll out over across those thousands of folders that the customer has created. Also, of course, avoid the hard-coded paths. Use the templates and template inheritance to determine somewhere. Try to avoid having that. I used that example before, /Sitecore /home /global. That kind of convention where you say, well, I'll just always hard code that. Avoid that. If you need something like a global folder under a site, put that on the site configuration. If you don't know this already, the site definition in the web config, you can add stuff to that. So you can add a global folder equals, and then a path or GUID to that folder. Because this allows you to be flexible. If you suddenly evolve into a multi-site scenario, you won't have those hard-coded paths in there. Each site can have its own global folder, or it can share a global folder. Even more cool, you get the option of both. So you've got 3 sites, 2 share a global folder, other have their own. Or you can use the template hierarchy, so you can do ancestors up to find the item that you're looking for, so the global folder. So there's different techniques to avoid those hard-coded paths. This is also use indexing for nested hierarchies. This is not really Helix or modular architecture. This is just common sense. Never use the descending axis. Should have been deprecated in version 5. If you're doing that, then you're in a world of pain again. It's at some point you'll get too many items, performance will go crazy, and customers will be very unhappy. So use the search index in the search API. Right, let's set up the templates for our events. I'll try to work through that. So we have got our solution here. We have got our, let's see if we can find, we have it in here. We've got our Sitecore. And just a second. So what we want to do is we want to create those first the data template or the interface template for the event. So we want to create a template that where we store the content for an event. And you remember the requirements. We needed a title and a date and all those kind of fields. So what we'll be doing is going in under templates here. Go to the feature. Go to the events feature. And in here, we'll create a new template. So if you remember the conventions, this is an interface template that we're creating because this holds data. It's going to be referenced by our business logic and our views. So we prefix this with the underscore, and we call it event. So put it in the events folder. So now we've created an event. And it's actually serialized at this moment. The item is serialized down by unicorn, so everything is wired up from our previous exercise. And we can add some fields. So we'll go in here, call it event. Oop. And we'll add a title field. So single line text. We'll add a description, which is a rich text. We can add a date. So let's just put that as a date. And a venue. and a venue address. We'll do that as a multi-line text. Okay. So we save that. So what we want to do here is also create the standard options for this, or standard values, sorry. So because standard values, just like fields, if you derive from an item, the standard values derives with it. So there's a sort of fallback down on standard values. So we can put $name in here, which would automatically populate that field, and just keep it at that. Now, the second thing we want to do is then wire that up in Sitecore. So, in Visual Studio. So we'll go over to Visual Studio. And we add a new class here called templates.
Where, to the events project?
Yes, because again we're working with the events templates, so we need the templates class to be in the events module as well. Now, in order to reference the ID, so again we're using the ID class from Sitecore so this is a poor man's ORM. So we map the fields and templates in Sitecore to IDs, to the actual ID class. But in order to have that ID class, we need to reference Sitecore kernel. So we'll just add a reference here. And since we're in Sitecore demo group in that project, the Sitecore kernel for us would be under lib/Sitecore. So the gulp tasks takes care of that for us. It will populate that folder with all the Sitecore kernel and all the Sitecore assemblies. In our case, it'll even bring in all the habitat assemblies as well, because if you've done it in the right way, set up Sitecore, set up habitat on top, and then when you set up the Sitecore group and build that using the gulp tasks, it takes all the assemblies from the bin folder of the website and copies it over, which allows the Sitecore group to actually use the habitat foundation modules. So it's sort of a clever little thing. In the with the new NuGet repository, we could actually just use the public NuGet to get Sitecore kernel. And in a sort of real life scenario, the sort of those kind of foundation modules that you want to use across different solutions, you might want to have a public NuGet feed or something like that to set that up, or a sort of an internal NuGet feed. Sorry. So let's just pick Sitecore kernel here. Oh. So we've got Sitecore kernel. And then what we do is we populate all that, and if you're following along on this page where we have the exercises, so in the wiki on the Sitecore demo group, you can click this one and it'll guide you straight to the file that actually has all these things set already. Of course, the problem is those IDs won't fit, but we will fix that. So we've set up the event template. So this is now our namespace templates.events.id is the convention that points to the ID of the events template. So I'll just go into Sitecore here, go to the events template, item ID. I'll copy that and paste that in here and do the same for all the title or all the fields here. So that's all good. So now we've got the event template created. We've wired it up so our business logic is ready to use it. So that's really all it takes in the event module to set up events, because that's the one template that events will know about. Now what we want to do at the same time is set up the event page type. So we want to set up the actual pages that in the website that is the events. So if you do remember the requirements that we talked about, then let me just drag this back again. The customer wanted an event list and an event page. So an event list that lists all the events and an event page for the specific event. So now what we do is we go to into Sitecore, and as this is page type templates, we create them in the project layer, and we want to create them for the group website and go into page types. So here are all the page types that's already in the group website. Is it very small or? And we can go and insert a new template. We could also, which is actually a lot easier, let's do that instead. Let's grab the event. Sorry, we'll create the event page first. So we'll create the event. So event here. And under page types, there you go. And under here, so this is where the template inheritance comes in. So we know this is a page. So what we want to do is start deriving from a lot of templates that has to do with pages. So under foundation, we want to be able to pull in assets. So if this page type needs a specific JavaScript or CSS to run, we can put that on that page. So our asset management will take care of that and load that in for that specific page. We could also, on the feature level, put in some metadata. So we'll have all the page metadata. So that'll give us, all the HTML titles and HTML tags for the header. We might also want some social integration so that it looks nice in Facebook if someone links to this page. So we'll have all the Open Graph stuff on this page. Since we're searching, since we want this to be a searchable page, we go to the indexing and add the indexed item. Now, as Anders was talking about in his talk, one of the methodologies that is applied in Habitat is to put maps in its separate module. So any page can be shown on a map, or any item can be shown on a map. So we've got a map here, and if we derive from map point, it'll give that page a set of coordinates, in this case the venue, and we can actually show that a map of events or a specific event. We can also, of course, the final and probably most important is add the event, so it's actually an event. So we're changing yes. So what we're doing now is, and this is where you listen very carefully. The most important part of Sitecore is choosing the icon. Right? So I think we're gonna go over time here because that's very, very important, and it's probably the one thing over the last many years that I've spent the most time on collectively.
Why would you remove the standard template?
Remove?
Yeah, or deselect the standard template from the basement.
Because it's already on some of the others, so it's derived through some of it. It's it doesn't matter if there's multiple standard
There's no effect,
templates.
right? If you leave it or if you remove it, as long as it's on.
Yes, as long as it's on one of them.
Yeah.
So it'll only derive from it once anyway. So yeah. And apparently I haven't chosen any icons, so it needs to unzip all my icons. That was bad.
Well, that's the long part, right?
Yeah. Well, browsing through and does this? No, I don't like the color in that one. I've chosen this already. Things like that. It's a tedious process. Come on.
The worst is when C1.
So you're creating items and templates and all that already? Or finished?
What was it? Like, I know there's a film here somewhere with a green dot on it. I found that is probably one of the biggest times I just said.
Hey. So I'm going to spare you the agony of going through all the icons. So I'll just go history. There you go, nice event one. And you might want to, create the standard values on this one as well. And you can see it has pre-filled $name on that. Alright, so that's our page type for the event. Now we also might want to create the event list, and we'll just go ahead and duplicate this one because that's somewhat easier. It's very similar. So event list, like that. And then of course, most importantly, change the icon. What? Unzipping again? No, okay. And we'll go there and we'll choose the time. So we'll choose this one. So now we've got the event list, the event. Now this derives from, because it was a news list, it derived from a news folder template. We'll just get rid of that. And we don't really need any template on that. What we do need is to go on to standard values and change the insert options and get rid of news article, and then add the event here. So this kind of shows the how you structure your page types on the site itself. So instead of having page types or pages or events or templates, spread all over the place, you really have a very nice collection of all the page types that are present on your website in one short list. If you want to go ahead and change the header for all your page types, just go through that list one by one. So it's really very nice and compact. And if you create a completely new site, what you do is you create a new site next to it, and then you create the page type for that site. So two sites can then have separate page types. So we, for the sake of demoing, we'll go up here. Oh, sorry, we'll just go to the home page here and assign the event list. As part of that. So now what we can do is we can go up to the group website home and insert a new event list, old events. That, as you see, oh, I forgot the dollar name stuff on here, I can see, but it already has all that stuff pre-filled, so it has the it has all the templates on it. That, and then I can create an event. So this is the Habitat Symposium. And we will just call up, sorry. There you go. And this is, of course, today. And the venue is the Hyatt Regency, New Orleans. And we can put in an address. We can include it in the search results, of course. Now, if we want to show it on a map, we got a little pop-up. We can fill that in. Here it is. And we can pick a location. And you can see it actually defaults to my home in Sydney. Hyatt Regency, New Orleans. There you go. Select that. There we go. So now we've got that event. If we want to create some more, the webinar. Test event. I don't know why it's so now we've got our 3 events, and that's that. So now we've actually got the events created on the website. We've got the event data. We've got everything there. Now all we need to do is show it on the website. It actually shows another interesting concept where when you define the content architecture with your customers, you could actually start creating the page types and the information architecture of the site before you're actually creating the functionality. So consider building the project level module before you create any features. You can actually define all the page types and how they're structured together before you even think about the features. You can even create the feature modules and just the base templates if you want. But you can show customers something already, like how things are structured, how the structure will work, and actually create the content structure before you create any features. We've often done a process where we create a static rendering, so just a static. So you get the front end HTML, you get the HTML from the customer, you cut that up into little chunks, and you put that static HTML into the renderings, and then you create all the page types, you hook up the renderings and the templates and everything, and you can actually present the static website inside Sitecore for the customer. So it's because otherwise you'll have to go through a long, lengthy process of developing the business logic before they can actually see anything. So it's a nice side effect. So you're all good with that? Okay. last part here is the layouts, the rendering, setting up that. So before we talk about that, let's just talk about some concepts. First of all, use MVC. I mean, there's nothing in Helix or the conventions that that forces you to use MVC. The conventions work just as fine with web forms, but just be aware that we're focusing more and more on MVC in Sitecore. So if you're not already on MVC, you should go there. So lots of things like the dependency injection and all those kind of focus areas for Sitecore is targeted towards MVC. Layouts and sublayouts. So a layout, the overall scaffolding of a page, or the sublayout, the restructuring of the placeholders inside on a page, all belongs in the project layer. And you can think about why, because the placeholders and how the placeholder settings and what renderings goes in what placeholders, all those kind of things require dependencies on the renderings. You need to know the renderings. And the renderings, as you probably worked out, live in the feature modules. So if you create a placeholder in one feature module, but you need to be able to put more renderings in it, then you're starting to put dependencies from one feature module over to others. So sublayouts, layouts, like that overall scaffolding belongs in a project layer module. It also gives the benefit of multiple tenants. So if you have two different tenants in a solution like we have the Habitat site and we have the Sitecore group website. Those two have separate layouts. So one can actually completely change the structure of the page. It uses the same renderings, but it has the same structure, or a different structure, sorry. Layouts, which is implied by the convention above. There's no business logic in the layouts. There's never any code in a layout. Also, this is again not necessarily a business logic specific, or sorry, a Helix specific convention, but you should really favor dynamic binding over static binding. So dynamic binding meaning setting up the renderings inside a Sitecore, as opposed to in a sublayout where you hard code the rendering. It's very often seen that you have a header and a footer sublayout, and you put in the logo and the search box and all those kind of things in that header. If you look at a project like Launch Sitecore that is available, that does the static binding stuff in some elements, in some areas. So when you want to go and create new page types that are slightly variant, an example of this could be the header of a website is often quite common on all the page types, and then you want to create the checkout flow for your commerce pages. A very common requirement for a checkout flow is don't show the navigation. You do not want customers to go away from the checkout. Once they're in there, bye, right? So you don't want them to see all the other links. So suddenly you have to copy the header except for that, and the only change is that main navigation or something. So the dynamic binding just gives you a lot more flexibility and future-proofs it a lot. You might think, well, then you get really, really, really long lists.
I thought like Sitecore 101 was don't dynamically bind content that's on every page.
Don't.
Dynamically bind components
Yes.
that are on every page. So that kind of is.
Yeah. Do dynamically bind components that are on every page. Because they're not on every page. I mean, if you want to future-proof it, yes, they're on every page but one. Because that's what life teaches us, right? Is there's always the exception. And there's an overhead in this kind of thing in maintenance, but it's going to be 5 minutes every 2 months. So it's a ridiculous little overhead going through those page types. If you have 20 page types on your website, I mean, you're not going to have 100 page types. You're going to have 20 or something like that max, right? Going through those page types and changing that header for 20 pages takes you 5 minutes because they're all in that list. You just saw it before under the project template. You just go there, you go click, change, click, change, click, change. Do it in Sitecore Rocks. You can do copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste. So it's really a simple change once you follow the structure. What I've seen before, speaking with 100 page types, I've actually seen that in some solutions because of this, because they had variations of page types that have slightly different layouts, and all they had to do was change the layout a little because it was statically bound. So have enough placeholders and enough dynamic binding, and you can work everything out. And dynamic placeholders is something that Sitecore should have had. So the ability to create these elastic designs where you expand the page and create more sections of the same. There's multiple implementations of dynamic placeholders, and do consider using that because it increases the flexibility. Renderings. Renderings belongs in the feature layer. Surprise. Now, the thing about renderings is that they can become very complex, especially if you want to create generic renderings that have all sorts of options you can set for it. In a multi-tenant scenario, multicultural, all that kind of stuff, it can become very complex. And sometimes you just want to make it really simple, and that's maybe favor duplication a little sometimes. Maybe have two different renderings that are slightly the same but a little different, and just copy it twice, because maintenance of that is a lot easier than having that one generic that has permutations and if statements and clauses and all that. And you get into that last scenario over there where people just open it up and they go, what? And I mean it's you have that kind of code, I'm sure. Luckily we've not seen XSLTs for a while. Those were definitely that last thing. Yeah. So, but sadly, you often see those views or renderings that are just monsters. So, align the rendering item name, so the definition item inside Sitecore. Align that with your CS/HTML file. So make it so that you can actually determine what belongs together. But again, as I mentioned before, favor the editors in Sitecore over you, the developer. Try to avoid the camel casing or especially the abbreviations or prefixes, odd prefixes, and things like that. The name, even though there's titles and display names and all that, the name has a weird tendency to pop up once in a while. So if you've had a relatively nice name, you get a lot better user experience. So.
The camel casing, if you have an ORM, really helps.
Yes.
They have features in it to put underscores
Yeah.
and stuff, but
Or it has attributes. It has attributes to align a class with an actual template. So if you put a name in there, you can say, my class name, I want it to be with camel casing, and then in an attribute actually point to the template that you want it to be refers to. So those kind of things, and that's why I say sometimes the tooling works a little against us. Yeah. And in those kind of cases, I mean, it's camel casing is a lot better than abbreviations, at least. So, but there are at least, and if you do use camel case, then make sure that you always put in display names. And once the customer goes, hey, I want that Chinese website, and you put in Chinese as a language, remember that there is going to be a person in China probably editing the site in Chinese, and the display name might fall back to the English display name or to the default name for Chinese. So all the English editors are happy. They see the nice, beautiful names, and the Chinese editor has this horrible experience because nothing's been translated inside Sitecore. So those are some of the sort of future state scenarios It's not as often in the English-speaking countries that you have multi-site or multi-language, sorry. But in Europe, it's very common. And you have different editors with different cultural backgrounds. They want the Sitecore environment in their own native language. So, prefix partial views with underscore. So, yep. So composing page layouts. Just an example again. So, again, the January marketing webinar. We've got the layout of the page. The layout lives in the project module, so in our project layer module, and we've got two renderings. So we've got the main menu and the secondary menu up there, and those live in the feature module called navigation. So that's wired in that way. And the main menu and the secondary menu only knows the interface template called _navigable. They have no idea whether they're shown on an event page or a news page or anything else. They just know they're shown on a navigable page. Now the event renderings then know about the _event template. So they will know that they're an event. On the other hand, they have no idea whether they're shown on an event page or on a page that's navigable or not. Could be a pop-up window with just the event details. Now the related events rendering, just for example's sake, that could show a search result of all the events with a given taxonomy that relates to this current event. In order to do that, it would need the _indexable. So that uses some business logic in the indexing module that knows about indexable. So that way it queries the index and it finds all the search index and all those kind of things. So that's kind of how the base template or template inheritance and the rendering structure hangs nicely together. So other layout related conventions, rendering parameters. So the parameters that you get when you click a rendering and you go, parameters? So a map, for example, if I put a map on my page, I might want to set the zoom level of that map, which I'll show you in a second. That is a rendering parameter on a map rendering. The rendering parameters template belong in the same project as the rendering. Makes sense. Compatible renderings. So if I want to change one teaser to another teaser type, so the image on the left-hand side, image on the right-hand side, those renderings needs to have the same data source template. They need to have the _event or _. They need to know about the navigable or the _event, both of them, because otherwise they're not compatible. So that means they belong in the same module. All compatible modules are always in the same module. Placeholders, as I mentioned, belongs in the project layer module. Avoid putting placeholders in the feature layer renderings. There are examples where it might be needed. So in the habitat feature, in the teaser feature in the habitat project, there's a teaser carousel. So it's a little carousel that you can put on, and it allows you to put in teasers in multiple spots, and you can sort of slide between them. That has a little placeholder inside it. But in that case, the only renderings you could put into that are teasers. So the placeholder only knows about teasers in its own module. If you suddenly added, another rendering in another module, you would clash with the dependencies. So that's why you don't want to put placeholders in. And again, the last one, favor a lot of placeholders. Because again, flexibility. The more placeholders you have, the more sort of flexibility you can create on the page. Of course, it aligns with the conventions or you need to consider it in your front-end development as well. Like how flexible do your pages get? But with all the responsive design and all those kind of things, I think we're all sort of agreeing that the rendering should be as flexible as possible in any size and width and all those kind of things. Set up the security or the untick the editable for some placeholder like the logo. You probably don't want people to change the logo. So just remove that from the header so it's not editable. Right, so data sources. So the rendering, so now we're on the home page and we're inserting a rendering teaser, or sorry, an event teaser. The rendering called event teaser. Now that needs a data source. So the data source window pops up and we select an event page. So now the event teaser knows of the underscore event. So this was what I was talking to before about the data source templates. So the event teaser doesn't care whether this is a page type or something else. We could just change this to be a data source template called event. So in this case, those kind of things are completely interchangeable. And it's dependent on your business requirements from your customer. Do they have repositories that are not sort of like a news repository, just a hierarchy of news articles, which is then shown on one page? Or is it actual pages in your website structure? But the features itself doesn't care whether it's one or the other. The content structure that you create in compliance with your customer's requirements sits in the project layer, and the feature itself, it works in both ways.